name out there. I'm like, oh my gosh. And that's great on one hand, but to me, it's about the inner work we have to do because the external personality shell that we put on, and it's almost like the difference between the church self you put on versus like how you really may feel in a situation, right? You go to church, it's kind of like there's a little bit of an extra being on a little bit sometimes, right? And a part of that is sometimes really closely related to our personalities. And so we can do that all the time. You talked about the audience. So it is kind of like sometimes we put on this audience, right? For different types, you show up a certain way. If you think about your family, sometimes you show up a certain way in your family compared to where you show up in the different areas of your life. And so it's that personality factor that we start to really believe that's us, that it's a part of us, but it's running the show, and we're not until we wake up to it, it's running the show, and we're not, I would say, directly connected to what our essence of God, who truly wants us to be. We kind of lost in part of our personality structure. We get kind of addicted to it. It's really addiction. It's an addiction. Every one of these is an addiction to something that really takes us from being like fully in tune with God. I hope that makes sense. Go ahead.
Kind of just staying on this kind of thought pattern with the question that I think maybe there was part of the question earlier was about arbitrary nature, but then you're talking about these little moments that happen early on, and I was wondering, Milton, about your take on kind of how these form and develop, because I've had some Enneagram training where they're like, there's these moments that happen at a very young age where this some kind of interaction with the brokenness of the world starts to form these patterns of thinking. And even I think back to my childhood, a very specific moment where like, this is the way things are going to be. I'm not going to let anybody else hurt me from now on. Putting up this, 8 barrier, and I'm going to go,
Right.
At it with people. What's your take on like how this kind of develops and how we end up with these particular traits?
Yeah, so I think it is, one, from my experience, from research I'm doing now, and from my faith in God, there is, I think there's a kind of a coinciding effect. Like things are happening at multiple times. It's not just like one thing happens, like you're just born this way or this just happened. I feel like they're all coinciding. God has a lot of times made sure, or every time made sure, that we kind of get what we kind of need in the situation. So around the age of 3, they're doing research and saying that's kind of when our personality kind of solidifies to what it's probably going to be going forward. Now, rather that's because something happened between 2 and 3 that your reference point in your mind. So for instance, you said, maybe I don't feel safe in a situation. You were safe, but as a baby, you don't have all of the reference points and things you need to say, I'm safe. So you develop one as a 5, 6, or 7 or something, right? Just because of that, or maybe even an 8, depending what you had to do in that situation. Not exactly sure, but around the age of 3 is when they're saying it solidifies. I've seen it within my own eyes with kids literally turning 3, and then all of a sudden it's like, I can pinpoint what your type is just about. Wow. And it blows my mind because you wouldn't think that, right? It's like you haven't lived long enough to have a personality, but they do. It's so fascinating. So that's kind of my take on it. And I think just from a spiritual lens, I feel like God definitely helps us. He crafts whichever one that we really are going to need going forward for us to truly have something that we have to really work on to go for. And I think that's the redemption piece where we have to work through these to find the redemption, to have that deep relationship with Christ. And that's the biggest thing. The work that I do for the Enneagram, I have never had a closer relationship with God in my life until studying the Enneagram and studying myself and understanding the nuances. So some things that I thought were okay and they were right, and they were just things that took me away from Christ. I thought they were so right though. I thought this is good. And I was like, but no, it's actually taking me away from God. Wow. So it's been a big exploration for me for sure. It's broken down some things, healing, trauma, a bunch of that. But yeah.
Is it, I'm not going to use the word inevitable, but is it common to see an evolution? Say if back when I was in my late 20s was different than what it was in my late 50s. Would it be common to see the same kind of evolution or maturation or something like that with Enneagram?
So by evolution, do you mean
Maturation,
Moving different types?
yeah, different types. I mean, or different emphases on the pie chart.
No, you don't. This is the interesting part about it. You don't change numbers. That is one thing that's a question that comes up a lot. You don't change numbers. Now, you may, depending on your development, depending on where you are in life, many of you travel the world, so you see different things. And things impact you in different ways. So you start to shift maybe ways that you interact and do certain things. But the core things, like the real core thing of your type, which everyone has, we haven't gone over it, but that thing doesn't change. And that's the thing that we have to constantly be aware of, pick up our cross daily, because it's always there. And that's the thing about it. It shows up every morning. If we don't do our inner work, our ego, personality, soul will wake up and run the show. And we every day have to wake up and say, I'm gonna wake up and do my inner work, make sure I'm connected with God, try to get aligned with God today, because every day it wakes up ready to do its own thing, you know? Now, there are points of transformation where you work with something so long that it doesn't trigger you as hard. It doesn't have the same weight it has, but it's like when you get to a new level of health or growth or maturation, the next level of it comes, and it's bigger than that one. It's like, oh, here's the next one. I got past it then, but now I'm on a new level. So it's kind of how I see it. Yeah.
Can I make a comment, kind of bring some of both of these together in a little bit, and you can tell me what you think about this, Milton. My sense is that what goes behind these, when you talk about that seminal moment that happens very early on, if I were going to say what it is generically, it's different, right? But generically what it is, it's something that I can't handle. And so the strategy, all of these are strategies in which in some sense I start to do to myself the one thing I can't handle. And here's what I mean. If what I can't handle, for instance, is the sense of threat out there, what I do is I turn it in and I start working nonstop at all the things that could go wrong. And so in a sense, I'm doing to myself before the world can do to me that thing that for whatever reason I couldn't handle it, right? Or there's this sense of I can't handle being ignored or or rejected, right? And so what do I do? Well, I kind of start the process of rejecting myself and working on making it into something, right? So that then I don't have to deal with it from out there. And so in a sense, what all of these are control mechanisms. Okay, like the core impulse is some measure of control control mechanism, and there's just different versions of it. But that's also why I think maybe it doesn't tend to change. You grow, but this is kind of at the level of operating system more than it is an app, right? So.
And part of what he was talking about is there's core fears and core motivations for types. And those things, they don't change. I wish they would. I would have been changed mine. So a core fear of the 4 is being abandoned. And so what do 4s do? They become very unique. So in the sense that you can't abandon them. You can't ostracize them because guess what? I'm going to be so different, so unique. Or I'm going to make myself distinct from you all so you can't have a chance to abandon me. 2s, being rejected. I'm not going to allow you to reject me, so I'm going to come forward so much. I'm going to love you so much. I'm going to care so much that you're not going to want to reject me because you're going to need me in your life to help you. So those are just kind of 2 examples of it's kind of doing that thing so it doesn't have to happen to them.
So I'm follow you with the idea of these personality types being somewhat consistent. And that's really a big, unique selling point for the Enneagram compared to other personality measurement systems, because there is movement, there is allowance for people to mature and grow in DISC or maybe Myers-Briggs, I don't know. I'm not an expert in those areas, but it seems like it's a pretty big assertion to make to say that you are one type out of these 9, and you will never ever change. And I'm just skeptical of that. And I think about 1 Corinthians 6:11, or I guess starting 9. Do not know that the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God. Don't be deceived, neither sexually immoral, the idolaters, adulterers, men who practice homosexuality, thieves, the greedy, drunkards, revilers, swindlers will inherit the kingdom of God. And such were some of you. But you were washed, you were sanctified, you were justified in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ and by the Spirit of our God. So what is the space for redemption? Because, sorry. We're talking about these areas as good manifestations of dominion that God ordained. And by sin, they're twisted in some way, and we superpose these concerns, and we start manipulating these good impulses. And, we even say we tend toward looking at the negatives that these personality types bring about in our lives, and which separate us from God. And that's the precise reason why we need to identify the personality type in order to crucify it, so that we can be close. That is what the cross that we were bearing.
Some aspect of it.
The self that we need to deny. So, man, it just seems like we are chaining people to one intransigent limiter or something. I don't know. And maybe that's getting right back to the box thing that we started with, and it's just finding the box so that you can get out of it. I'm not sure about that. That's the only. I follow everything until the point where we say, this is the type and it will never change. I need a little bit more just to buy into that.
So, buying into it or not, I mean, as a coach, I would ask you a question. Why would that make you feel like held in or tight? So one thing about the types, whether to buy in or not, it's literally just a part of sometimes how we've been constructed. It's some things that I can't destruct it in a way that would say, hey, we switch types every once in a while. Now, here's the gift of it. And we talked about, you mentioned how there's a fluidity to it where you're not trapped in your type structure. So when you are what we would call in the Enneagram space present, head, heart, and body, where you are truly aware of what's going on and you're connected, you are aligned with God. Like, there is a different area where now you can choose. If you need to jump into your 1, you can jump into your 1. If the situation calls for you to be a 9, you can move into your 9. If you need to do any of these things, you can actually move into it. And we do exercise to help people move into types so they can feel how they feel in their bodies. But that's the gift of it. The thing is, it's just not home base. It will not feel the same. So the things that you get frustrated with in your body, I'm talking somatic body that just like grinds your gears naturally. It's not going to grind the gears the same way as Jackson. It's just not. Like, over the lifespan, it's just not. It may fire him up. Same thing may be annoying, but it's kind of like the type structure, the way that it wires since like the age of 3 within our like nervous system with all of us. Our type structure comes through almost everything we do. The more you pay attention to it, it is wired so deeply within us. So maybe if we spent a whole lot of years unwiring those parts, maybe we could possibly, but the wiring of it is so deep. It's like in almost our cellular structures in the way we carry our bodies. Like, it's something that, like, there's a lot of information that's popping in my mind. But it's a lot of ways, like from the way that we sit, from the way that we talk, the words we use, the vocabulary, the energy we bring, like everything. And there's a lot of little things that, like, Enneagram, I guess, professionals who know what they're doing can pick up on with a person. So there's certain energies, like, okay, I can feel a person's energy, knowing, like, okay, maybe this is their type, maybe this is not their type, based on certain things. Or something's off here, right? Maybe there's a level of trauma that I can't tell, because there's something there that's like blocking them from being able to really share that. So that's a tricky area. I mean, it's hard to say, but it is kind of what it is until we, I guess, find more developments of people getting out of it. But I think the best and the most beautiful part about it is that I truly learn to love myself, and I truly learn to love God when I can get to the root of my type structure and keep working. I develop layers of love for myself that I hadn't had before. And I can't explain it because it's an experience, but it's just developing this deep level of love for self, and because you know just how much God actually loves you, even through all of the stuff and the gook we struggle with. So that's the best way I can explain it. I don't know if that helped at all, but that's the best way I can explain it.
Let me try to give a complimentary explanation that maybe a little more theological also. The first thing is that this is smeared by sin. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's your sin that smeared it. We come into a world already marked by sin, right? And so these kind of overlays of the basic soul impulses seem to happen very, very early. And so this is happening before an age even where like I'm aware and choosing or something like that. It's not like I build this. It's, as I'm interacting, it's what I become. Okay? So that's the first thing. To say that there's a smear from sin doesn't mean that you're guilty of this and that your type is a guilt. Okay? So that's the first thing I would want to clarify. The second thing is to talk about redemption and about, as it were, the permanence of that strategy that gets like locked in real low. We got to talk about hands for both of them. Okay? And in two senses. Anybody here left-handed? Okay.
Am I the only person? Seriously?
Only one? Okay. That's okay. All right. Who's right-handed? Everybody? Okay. Has anybody changed their handedness? No? So I'm right-handed, but I have worked on okay, I'm going to try combing my hair with my left, and it's crazy awkward. I can get to where I can do it, but I can't, it never becomes 100%. And being ambidextrous really just means that you've developed some facility with your non-dominant hand. But handedness is one of these things that doesn't change through life, right? Because it gets locked into the neural structure that low down. Okay? That doesn't mean you don't develop and grow and have this whole kind of process of transformation. It's just that it's something that doesn't, it's not deleted or altered by it. It can be modified but not deleted, right? And that's what I take these patterns to be, something like that, like handedness. The other thing we got to say about hands is, Jesus takes the scars in his hands with him in his resurrected body. The wounds, what's there because of pain and suffering are transformed into glory. Okay? And he would not have the same glory without the holes in his hands. Okay?
Yeah, love that. Love that analogy too. Goodness gracious, I'm still in that. What I also want to do is for everyone in this moment to kind of take a deep breath for a second. Okay, and the reason I said that is because in this room we have people who are very serious about their faith, right, in Christ, and so we go so we're very serious about how we enter the faith, the things that we're doing, how we're operating. And so at the same time, we can be very hard on ourselves mentally, internally, when we're trying to work with ourselves. And so we can beat ourselves up, and that doesn't help us to grow or, like I said earlier, hold it lightly sometimes. Internally, we can really beat ourselves up. Let us mess up in sin or something. Oh, my goodness. We really good at beating ourselves up. So with this, the Enneagram, really seeing your patterns, really lighten up. And when you speak to yourself, try to be a little bit more gentle, because that allows you not to be as resistant to what you may need to see and may need to work on and may need just healing from. Because it's like your inner child. Externally, we all grow up. We have no choice in externally how we grow up. But internally, we still got that little child with all them wounds. And he's like, or she's like, can you help me? And we're mean, no, you messed up again. It's like God has so much grace and love. And definitely he wants us to be serious, and take it serious. And there's things that are no-nos, right? As you're talking to a child, and things are fine. But we have to be able to have a little bit healthier self-talk when we're going through this, because we're going to see parts of ourselves and we're going to be oh my gosh. And if we beat ourselves up, it's going to be really hard to keep going and develop. and see a little bit more, go to deeper layers, and actually truly develop that love that I think God wants us to have with our internal selves as well, so that we can even show even richer and deeper love to others outside of us that we serve. So yeah.
What are we born with from God? Because I see that it's at 3 years old, then we have this, and then we can't change the number. But we can change. What are we born with? What do we call that? From God. What do we have in us from God?
Everything, I guess. I'm thinking it's everything from that standpoint. A lot of people, when they, because even when the Bible talks about becoming childlike, right? So a big part of that sometimes is before things got locked in, there's a part of us that was childlike that wasn't overly attached to these strategies of how to navigate the world. You know, granted, we needed help and we had to trust others outside of ourselves. And that's one of the biggest parts. Before 3, we could trust outside of ourselves way more because we had to. And we developed these strategies over 3. Now we're trying to think we can navigate the world our own type of way instead of relying on God like we really need to. So I think that becomes probably the biggest part. I think we're born directly with what God gives us, and we develop a strategy at 3, and from there we have to work our way back to dealing with and being a kid and relying on God in different ways. So, that's just my view.
Well, I guess I would just say it's kind of a mystery, like from where we sit, what we were born with, because none of us can remember it, right? So that, like, in terms of personally, I can't go back that far. I think, theologically, this is, as it were, the basic, what we're created as, but there's something about putting this in the world as it is now that it gets twisted in these ways, okay? So I would say that we all have each of these 3 core impulses, and, they get distorted in different ways, and we develop strategies based on that. But we couldn't even have the distortions if we weren't made with these impulses to start with. So this is where I think this is like its substructure, it's down underneath. And so if you ask, like, what are the types made out of? It's patterns of these 3. So, I mean, that's in us somewhere, right? And that's why all of us can, as it were, have access. We can talk about it in Enneagram in terms of access to the other types. But the point is that the reason we do is because all of us have producing, protecting, connecting, right? That's all in us real deep. And in whatever way, that gets modified, it's always there, So, yeah.
And just thinking, and if you have a question, please ask. But just thinking about where you find your value. When it's not related to God directly, where do you find your value? So when something comes across you that makes you like furious or really hurts you really bad, where do you find your value? And a lot of times, every time really, you find your value in your type structure. So if you're an 8 and you don't feel strong, that is a problem, because now the thing that I value myself to be is a problem, right? Or if I'm a 3, achieving. Like if I'm not achieving, if I'm not accomplishing, where's my value? If I'm not producing performance, what am I doing? What is my worth? Who am I, right? All of them. Every type structure has a way that it does that. And so if you start to look at it from that lens as well, it helps to be like, oh, I've been putting my value in this instead of God, right? Or even for the 2, for me being a helper, like I'm the helper. It's tricky. The pride thing with 2s is tricky. It's like I'm the helper. And so it takes the place of like finding value in God instead of finding value, instead of finding value in God, they're finding value in I am the helper, and I'm the person who helps, and no one can really help me. And so it's a struggle. So all of these places where we find our value, that becomes an issue because it takes away from our true value, which is coming from simply being created and loved by God. That starts the point right there. But we get lost in all these other things. So.
Yeah, that's one of the challenging things with the Enneagram. I think is that it takes us to a pretty dark place about ourselves, and it's tough to see. And it forces us to go through this kind of process of not ego death, but trying to crucify our ego, maybe beating our ego, flogging it, preparing it for crucifixion. I think that's the process that it's confronting to us in a really deep way. Like it's contrary to our biological impulses.
Yes.
It's contrary to so many things that we feel. And yeah, I think that's the reason why people always talk about the Enneagram as a journey.
Yeah.
It takes time. I think it takes coming to it and stepping away from it for months, for a year, and coming back to it at a different point. So yeah, that's Milton and I were first really starting the Enneagram 8 years ago, 9
Well,
years ago.
more than that.
Yeah, it's like that's kind of now I'm starting to feel like I'm starting to know myself. Really starting the Enneagram journey, the inward journey. But yeah, that's just to say, like, this weekend is as great as you guys are. This weekend is like not much
very small,
in the grand scheme of human
Right.
Yeah.
ego, what we have to go through.
Yeah, because it's painful. The journey is painful, but it's also healing at the same time. It's one of those weird things, right? It's like if you go through it, it's going to suck while you go through it, but every time you come out on the other side of something growth, you're going to be a little bit better, a little bit closer to God. Your relationship will be a little bit deeper every time. But it's just like your body biologically, your heart, your soul doesn't want to do it. It's like, well, sounds good, but I think I'm okay, right? So that's the thing about it. It challenges us in every single way, especially in our somatic bodies. And that's one reason I had everybody take a deep breath, because soaking this in, the body can get really tight and you don't even notice it. The body's just getting tighter and tighter and tighter. And then it's like, what is going on? What's happening, right? And before you know it, you're not even thinking about your body. You're just in your mind, like figuring out or being frustrated, like what's going on, thinking about self. So in those moments, take a deep breath, right? Let the body get a little bit more receptive again so that you can have autonomy to make a choice you want to make instead of the type structure kicking in, right? And being like, you know what? I'm just going to choke you, you know? So, I'm glad you shared that. I'm so glad you shared that.
So I'm assuming you can say something about it. My understanding is based off of this that Jesus must have been not smeared.
There we go.
So if Jesus was, he's not smeared in all these ways. So he's straightforward when it comes to production and community and everything. And we're all supposed to be becoming more like Jesus
Right.
in all of our various and different ways. So I guess what I want to hear more of, and I realize I'm just asking for stuff off the top of your head. I realize this is like a life project, and you're not going to answer it in like a nutshell, but everything. I realize, but you said, Milton, something earlier about you do work like every morning, like my inner work, or something. I want to hear kind of for each number related to their specific challenges and the ways that they need to change. Like, what are some specific things that are pretty common, that each number needs to, okay, today I need to pay attention to this, or this is, something I really need to.
Okay. It depends on your level of growth, but I'll just try to go off the top of the dome for each type, 1 through 9. We'll see where we end up. One thing for ones, I would say is definitely finding something either very creative to get into, because it's going to help. Nature and creativity helps ones because sometimes there's structure and order and things having to be right or perfected. What art does and nature does, there's already this imperfect perfection to it that you don't have to try to fix it. And so for their mind, sometimes if they can get into a creative space or do things creative on a regular basis, it really can help them to kind of relax some of the inner critic that can be pretty strong. So that's one thing, right? That's one thing. I'm thinking of multiple things, but I'm trying to go all the way around so I don't get stuck on a number. All right. Type 2s. Spending time alone is actually very important for type 2s to cultivate what's really going on inside, to make sure that they aren't going so far out so often that they haven't cultivated the connection and love with self that they really need. And so they're not always, when they go out, they're not like trying to search to help in order to get that feeling back. So for taking time alone for ones is actually can be quite magical. Having specific time to literally just be alone, no contacting anybody, no doing none of that. Just like maybe you, your journal, or just you and God. Like that's it for just making sure there's a period of time to do that. 3s, I would say for 3s, it is really checking in with what are your emotions, or the question of what do you want. And this becomes important because 3s a lot of times can get they can get stuck in what role that they play. And so getting to their heart helps them to maybe figure out what desires and wants God has placed on their heart, not just the wants and desires of people around them or what they grew up with, but taking time for them to check in with their heart. So 3s really need a practice or exercise that helps get them to their emotions. Not just their head, not just their body. They're great with their head, they're great with the body because they use those and substitute for the heart. So if they can get to the part of the heart where they're able to spend time with that part of them, then they can connect with more people on a much deeper heart level and not just a head and body level. 4s, something they can do is a gratitude journal. 4s tend to, they have envy and a lot of times and longing. That's one of their biggest sufferings. And one of the best things that they can do is take time and literally write down, like daily, the beautiful things that in their life that they do already have or have been gifted with. That definitely helps, right? For 5s, one really simple thing, I'm gonna give 2 things for 5s. One for 5s, in the morning, stretch or work out. It's really good for them to get their body online because their heads are ready to go, but the body sometimes can be disconnected. So literally warming up their bodies actually helps them to get their heart online, which is really an interesting dynamic for them. And then the second thing I would say for 5s is the second thing for 5s is being able to find a way to share something like either that's in their feeling or emotion area with someone they care about on a frequent basis, really daily basis. And to use an emotion word, not just like I think I feel or I feel, but then there's not an emotion next to it. Be able to use an emotion because it's going to help them to develop their emotional vocabulary and their own like feeling of emotions.
Does hungry count?
No.
Oh.
Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry. It does not count. It does not count.
Just call me and tell me.
Okay, I'm sorry. Keep going.
For 6s, one of the things to do for 6s is a lot of times 6s actually need kind of a vigorous workout because they need something to help deal with the amount of anxiety and anxiousness that they need. So they need some type of activity that really gets their heart rate moving, keeps them rushing, and gets their body to be settled. Because when they're settled in their body, they can start to trust their own thinking and their own intuition. Because without it, they have a lot of anxiety, and it's hard to trust anything, especially themselves. So doing that and maybe like sometimes spontaneously choosing something without overthinking it. Just trying to trust the gut. So it's a practice. It's not gonna be easy, but it's like not overthink it, just choose. Not overthink it, just choose. It don't have to be big decisions, right? Don't do your house that way or your car, that'd be a bad decision. But small decisions, what you're gonna buy at the store, don't overthink it, just choose and get used to getting that part of your body and trusting your gut and yourself. That's helpful. 7s, one thing I recommend is to slow down. And by doing that, it is to maybe do meditative things where you slow walk, maybe you talk slower, maybe you eat slow, you meditatively eat. But it's literally slowing the body down because 7s' minds are moving so fast and then it manifests into their bodies. And so then they're everywhere doing everything. But if they slow down, it allows them to be, it gives them more clarity. because there's a lot of fuzziness with 7s in their minds because it's so much activity, brain activity, that they're not always clear on what they need or want or should or being called to do. 8s, there's a balance here, because some 8s hate being still, like meditation. So for 8s, I would say if they're not in a place where they can meditate in a way that they feel they can do it, I would say something in the practice of yoga or something that moves their body in a way that moves it in a more slow way, that it's not a strong jerk, herky move, but it is something that moves them, even qigong, that's another one too, to move in a way that uses the energy of their body, but it uses it in a way that's measured and managed, because a lot of times their energy is not always measured and managed. It's just kind of like, boom, here we go. Like, here we go, moving forward, I'm doing this, and it's not measured, right? So this helps them to understand the gravity of the power they have in their body, because they're not always sure. And that's why they can go around sometimes and intimidate people by mistake, right? So being able to do that helps them to measure and have a healthy sense of like how much they have in their bodies, and it helps them to figure out, am I tired? Wow, I may actually be tired, because they don't know a lot of times. They will keep going till their body gets sick, and then they'll be like, oh, time to come back. I guess I get sick and now I'm ready and to go again. So they do this cycle. They have to be very careful. For 9s, one thing that I say for 9s is to create an anger list. 9s have a ton of anger, and I usually give 9s the emotion wheel. And the emotion of anger has, I don't know, about 12, 15 different sprouts of like things that are emotion that represent anger. And I have them just note it, jot it down on a daily basis of like what things make you angry and what emotion is attached to it. Because a lot of times it's becoming aware that I'm actually quite angry. And so when they can become aware of those things, then they can actually figure out what are those things, and it's just something I need to do about them. And it figures out like, how can I step forward and actually make some things I want to come into the world or to give to the world, actually to do them, and not just to kind of think about them, read about them, but actually be about it. So that becomes kind of the difference. And those are just some things that types can do. There are many more, but those are the things that kind of popped up for me in my mind right off the bat. So if you have any questions, I can answer that. But,
I have something personal. I mean, just going off of this, like, I mean, it's awesome. I really, but, so I want to just reiterate, make sure I understand. So we don't change our type throughout our lifespan.
correct.
But I would hope that we can move from an unhealthy place to a healthier place, and that, I guess, is then a continual work of what you were talking about. It's a continual struggle of every day, knowing our core fears and struggles that our type struggles with, but we are in our ability, we have the ability to continuously, obviously, be renewed by Christ and conquer these things and be redeemed. And I loved, Daniel, what you said about that all of those hurt and whatever has happened to make us struggle and come out is fully redeemed in Christ. And so I think that's really cool. So if you guys wouldn't mind sharing how you guys have personally worked on yourselves to continuously, I guess, stay in a healthy place.
Well, I'm not going to say stay. It's work every day.
So how, I don't know, I'm not looking for like one answer, obviously. There's not like a magic remedy, because that would be too easy. But I don't know, just on what you have found to be helpful personally for you, that has really encouraged you in continuing to work, that has continued to truly look at yourselves and dig, and if there's anything that you can think of that you're like, oh yeah, like when I did this, and it may not apply to everybody, but it may resonate to, I don't know.
One thing I do want to say, when you mention, like, see, the best part about Jesus is not attached to any of these.
Right.
And that is what we're aiming for, right? To not be overly attached to the personality structure that we become attached to. It's that work that we're trying to do so that we are not just so attached to it. And so one of the gifts would be Like when you walk down the street or somebody knows you, if they know the Enneagram, they don't know your type based on just knowing you, like just looking at you, because you operate differently until you tell them, or they can see telltale signs after knowing you for a while. But just meeting you, they probably shouldn't be able to tell your type, but our personalities are so strong, they do. So that's one of the journey thing. For me, because I'm hogging the mic and I'm gonna pass it real quick. For me, one of the biggest things when I really started to do my own inner growth work, it was really getting into, for me, sadness. It is one thing I have avoided for a long time. And that, for me to develop my emotions, and specifically sadness, because I had no connection to like my emotions, like I really didn't. It helped me immensely because there was so much there, and I hated it. I still kind of hate it, but I enjoy it a little bit more. I've developed a new relationship with it. It helps me appreciate things way more than before I did. Kind of like the movie, what's that movie, Inside Out? Yeah, kind of like that a little bit. But for me, exploring my emotions was the first thing that I did, and the ones that I don't readily have a good connection or relationship with, that helped to transform me because it made me go down avenues I would never go down, just running in my personality structure.
Yeah. So at the heart of 5 is a sense of not being enough. Okay? That relations, tasks in the world, all that out there, I'm just not enough for it. And so I have to withdraw in order to prepare. And so the danger is to always be preparing to live and never get around to it, right? And I think for me, what's happened that has kind of drawn me out even before I knew of the Enneagram, but kind of part of what Christ was doing was this gospel of the kingdom, and getting this understanding that it's God is at work right where you're at. He's inviting you in, and so start looking for where's that thing He's going to do with you in that spot. How can you join in? And what that did was it allowed me to move very much against the type, instead of all withdraw. You know, I still pull back and study and stuff. I mean, that's there, no doubt. But I found, as it were, the courage to step out, knowing, yeah, I'm not enough, but I don't have to be enough because there'll be somebody else there also, right? And that's really been, for me, the heart of growth is I don't have to be enough. I can be there, and I'll find that God's working too. And together, that's enough. Because God's there, that's enough, you know? So, yeah. Yeah, Liz.
The feeling I get when I hear about it, because it's so specific, etc. It's
Mm-hmm.
kind of, because I'm imagining, like you were saying, what do you do, or Carly, how
Mm-hmm.
do you work with it?
Mm-hmm.
The first that comes to me is a lonely ride, because who do you connect to with your problems, or
Mm-hmm.
with your, it's only an inner thing you work with, because others may not know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's not only inner. And so one thing I'll say is sometimes it's the part that hurts that is how we connect.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, that's right along the lines of what I was about to say. Part of it is my inner work, and it's just you and God doing the work. You're discovering, you're becoming aware, and it's tough. But here's the best part about groups like this. When people understand the language, especially when you start to understand the language of the Enneagram, I can speak to you from my inner self, and you get it. And now I resonate with you. Now I hear you. Because a lot of times as I coach in the Enneagram, I coach people, they'll explain what's going on internally. They'll be like, did you get what I was saying? And I'm like, yes. Every time I get what you're saying. Because I've done the work, my own inner work, so I already know kind of my inner landscape for the most part. but I also understand other people's types and what's going on inside. So when they explain, it's like, this is going on, does that make sense? I'm like, yes, it makes sense. You don't have to ask that question every time you explain yourself. I got you. So there are people in communities, and I think especially ones like this, where we can share what's going on inside, where people can be like, oh, and they can catch it. And you can feel held, because I think that's one of the biggest things. We don't always feel held when we have conversations with people who may not fully understand what's going on inside of us. They may be like, oh, okay, yeah, but you're like, you don't get me, or you don't see me, or you don't hear me, you know, or I don't feel safe with you. Those big three centers of intelligence. But when you have people who can do those three for you, you can share that inner peace that allows you to better connect or to heal from it, because people can see it, and then you feel like, oh my goodness, I feel safe in this area. This is rare, right? Or I feel seen, I feel heard. That's rare, and that's beautiful stuff. I'm feeling it in my body right now as I say it. So, yeah.
Is James on? Because this.
Yes.
Okay, he's ready, or
Yeah.
go ahead and see if
Good time, man.
you can shoot a note over and see if they're ready. I see that we're connected.
They can hear you.
Oh, they can hear me,
Yeah.
but we can't see them.
No. No video, no.
And what we're going to want to do when they come on is turn it around so everybody can see and hear them, and turn the camera so they're not just looking at me and Milton.
Yeah, no, not just us.
Yeah. Maybe while we're waiting for him, because it could be a moment.